So good morning, everybody. And thank you to Will and to Ez and everybody for the invitation to join the panel today and to chair the panel. Very delighted to be here and hopefully just give you a little bit of an introduction about me and my role as head of Sustainable Business Innovation at SAP and what we are doing in this space. And then I think we'll kind of go around the panel, so to speak, and understand a bit from each of the panel members about their perspective on the subject. So at SAP, I'm hoping my clicker works here. Maybe not quite. There we go. So at SAP, just to give a little bit of context, so as mentioned, the systems of supply and demand, and at SAP we've very much been at the sort of the nexus of that sort of design area for the last 45 years or so. Our systems pretty much touch about 75% of everything that kind of moves around the planet. So we've got a really unique perspective on some of the challenges here and some of the sort of the systems design issues that are necessary in order for us to be able to, make a difference in this topic area. So we've had design thinking at the very heart of everything we've done for about the last 20 years. Our chairman, Hasso Plattner, has his name on the D School in Stanford, and it's really an essence of everything we do. And to develop this conversation a bit further, I've been focused on the issue of plastics waste over the last 18 months or so, and we've been working through a design process in ourselves in terms of how to tackle that and how to tackle that global challenge and that global imperative. So this is something I kicked off with the Design Thinkers Academy here in London about 16 months or so ago now, focused first of all on the consumer, on the citizen. How can we help design an experience for the citizen to help them understand their role in the context much more effectively and to help nudge their behaviors, maybe either at the point of purchase or at the point of disposal in order to be able to do the right things. And that's been a really interesting process. We brought together sort of 30 of the world's largest brands, and we kind of collaborated for a few days around some cutting-edge research. And that's been a very kind of important process for us to sort of think through some of the key issues that are necessary in order for us to tackle this. One of the key concepts that we've been working on is an idea of a plastics cloud, which is really a sort of provocative statement, but the idea is that the data that exists around the world that can actually solve the issues to do with things like plastic waste and pollution does actually more or less exist in some way, shape or form. The issue is the right people don't necessarily have the right access and the right perspectives on that data in order to make the right decisions. So we've been working through this concept over the last 12 months or so, but what we realized is by having the consumer view, we weren't necessarily solving the problem of what's actually happening in the emerging markets, the 7 major rivers in Asia that account for 91% of the ocean plastics challenge. So about 6 weeks ago, we hired a ship, and we filled it with 160 of the world's largest businesses and scientists and stakeholders from across the whole ecosystem. We had 3 of the top 5 biggest CPG companies. We had 2 of the biggest chemical companies, the world's largest waste management company, all on board, really together for 4 days, following a design process to understand what are the innovations that are really necessary for us to tackle this issue. And where we are now, and this is really a working model, and I'd invite conversation on this later on in the break, but we've really come to the point of view that we need to be doing 4 things as a company. Number 1, we need to be creating a new marketplace for recycled plastics. Our marketplace for our procurement network has got something like $3 trillion worth of spend going through it at the moment, and 4 million businesses subscribing. So we're going to open up that network to enable the material economics to be opened up so that the street value of waste in India can be increased and to enable the waste picker communities to connect with brands here in the UK and in the West to be able to get better value from those materials. We're also opening up a platform to share best practices. So there are good spot marks of good practice happening around the world, particularly in Northern Europe, particularly in the UK. But we're looking to bottle those best practices and share those across the world, across the 500,000 businesses that are throughout the planet. We're then looking to take the insights, the data, the perspectives from those first 2 pieces and deliver those to the emerging markets, to the waste management community, to the investors. The capital that is necessary to build the waste management infrastructure to turn the tap off on those 7 major rivers, it exists. The technology exists. These are not groundbreaking challenges. The challenge is how do we get the right predictability into the right investment in the right places. So the plan is to provide the insights from these first two areas to, there's a great saying, investment follows data. So provide the data to enable that investment to happen. And then fourth, it's about how we engage consumers in general and have a conversation with consumers and connect them more closely to brands so that brands can understand people's desire for more sustainable materials, but also to use that as a vehicle to help educate and help nudge the education of consumers and get away from perhaps some of the sensationalism that might exist that might drive the wrong behaviors and kind of cut through to drive the right actions. So that's me, just in a very brief nutshell. I wasn't going to take, as the chair, I wasn't going to take a huge amount of the slots, but feel free to continue the conversation with me. I'm at Stephen Jamieson on Twitter or LinkedIn. Catch me in a break. Happy to continue the conversation. But I'll pass on now to my right, and I think I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, my mic is on. Hello, I'm Angela, and I run an online platform called Worm Arkitekter. It's misspelled in the program. I'm not actually talking about age. It's art. So I have been doing Worm since 2014. It started off as an online blog where I would interview different types of cultural practitioners, artists, curators, academics, who are involved with talking about environmental issues in a creative way. And so this has built up over the years to become something that is much more offline as well. So I have also been curating exhibitions. This is something that was in Oslo a few years ago, and it was a really good opportunity to talk about how our human effects and impacts on the natural environment can be talked about in a gallery setting. So here we have, let me just come back to it. So here we have Joey Holder, whose art talks about the genetic remodeling of sea creatures. And then this one was about worms and how they are actually beginning to nibble and digest plastics and how that has an impact on our consumption. Is the consumption kind of like changing, or are we continuing to use our plastics because we know that there's some sort of like natural solution? And this one, Jakob Steensen, talking about a natural ecology that has re-emerged after financial speculation, where a holiday resort that was half built failed to be completed, and then the rabbits started to come back into the half-built hotels. And so this is a kind of like a video form of a VR installation. And so things have also kind of like come back online. I have curated an online project in the form of a website which gathered 13 artists doing quite a range of projects. This was actually a recipe for lemonade. Another VR installation of aspen trees. Our plastic waste, and this is specifically about plastic bags. And then also a project that talks about nuclear waste management in the indigenous areas of Australia. But what I really want to kind of like narrow down in this moment is that we need to think about why we're talking about climate change, especially in this present situation. Are we planning different futures? In terms of like a plural futures with an S on the end, who is actually taking the priority? Who is actually taking the most amount of power to drive forward for this kind of futures? So I want to kind of like specifically hone in on less economically advantaged populations, not only in the developing countries, because we also have people of colour, indigenous global north, who are suffering the consequences of climate change, are actually on the front lines, but are much more marginalised socially, economically. And so my project with Worm is quite a long-term one. I want to be able to provide some sort of platform to gather more works by people of colour, queer people, differently able-bodied people, to talk creatively about climate change. And so another aspect of my research is contemporary Chinese science fiction. So to me, it is very, very interesting how we use science fiction maybe as a vehicle to think about more imaginative, more inclusive futures. And so recently in the past year, I've given many more talks and workshops on the subject of climate change and have taken a bit of a break from curating things because I found that it's really important to actually get to know the participants that WORM is actually reaching. And so there have been various workshops on dissecting quite large ideas in climate change into kind of smaller topics. For example, one was on decolonizing polar history and the idea of exploration. So when we're out there digging up ice cores and celebrating, pastime heroes who have explored certain areas of the world, is there a colonial history? Is there a history that is exploiting certain populations? And so these are things that I feel are quite fundamental in talking about within climate change. And I hope that the design summit will kind of like bring these about as well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to Will, Sara, for inviting me. I'm here to perhaps to bring an element or dimension on design that sometimes is a bit forgotten, and on the contrary, I think it's quite important. We had a very good long list by S of what design can do and the elements, but I think we forgot one: heritage. I've been working on heritage for 20 years as a director of the Center for World Heritage at UNESCO, and then as a Director General for Culture. So I've been really looking worldwide at this very important dimension of our society, which is the way in which we look at the past. We try to preserve it, or sometimes destroy it. We try to alter it and so on, but essentially, a dimension that looks at the past. And this is not something that is alien to design. On the contrary, I think it should be embedded much more for two reasons, which are philosophical, but very, very important. We are talking a lot of philosophy here. But first of all, we shouldn't see the past as something to eliminate. Design is not here to eliminate the past or to just merely substitute it. I think we should see the past, and therefore what has gotten to us through the evolution of the physical environment as essentially a field of experiences. Before us, many people tried to do similar things or with the means of the time, and they produce certain things which we use. Every building, or almost every building, and every city is longer than our life. So we live in cities that were designed before us. So we have to adapt and adjust and learn from the way in which they were built. I think there is a richness in this in heritage that really provides design with a substantial and strongly substantial basis to address the future challenges. The other dimension which I find when I look at the past is something that, again, design sometimes doesn't look at, which is the long term. We operate on short term. We operate for tomorrow, something that happens. Very seldom design embodies a long-term view. On the contrary, if we look at heritage and what has come to us from the past, we can see how things reacted to social changes, physical changes, technological changes, so we can adjust our own design to what things that will come in the future. So I think the dimension of long-term can be better seen in the past and better embodied in the future of our design through a careful consideration and analysis. Because I am so passionate about the past, I don't know if you are, but I read a lot of what happened in the past. And I just read a book, which I found scary but very, very interesting. It's called The Year Civilization Collapsed. And the year is by an archaeologist called Eric Klein. And the year he refers to is 1177 before Christ. What happened? Well, I don't know if you're interested in the collapse of ancient civilization, but look at it, because in fact, many of the things that happened around that time, the 12th century before Christ, are around us. Climate change, desertification, migrations, social unrest, conflicts of internal turmoils that shattered a world which had achieved a very high level of civilization. The Egyptians with the Ramesses, the Hittites, the Mycenaean and Minoan, they were really high level civilization. We have the evidences. Well, around in less than 50 years, this world, which was really the first globalization of the time, collapsed. Literally, it was reduced in bristles. I mean, it was just disappeared, except perhaps for the Egyptian, but they lasted just a little more, but then they sort of collapsed also. I think it's important to see what happened and how societies reacted, because that's, a little bit what, we see around us, and influences the way in which we look at things and we use design as a tool to address issues. We have, when I look from the heritage lens, I see two things which I like to share with you, both on the supply and demand. In terms of demand, we see that climate change is really endangering things that we care about. Not only in the natural environment, which is heavily affected. We were talking about the bleaching of the coral reefs. I mean, we have, or the desertification of certain places, or floodings, things that happen, fires, sea level rise, which can endanger cities, including my own city. I'm from Venice, by the way, so I have some experience with flooding. And so we have to find responses. And of course, there is a key word, adaptation. Has been, but adaptation is not enough, I think. I think we need a higher and stronger response. We need to redesign certain environments, and we have to think about how this will become a reality somehow. We can counter it. We can try to reduce, of course, carbon emissions and all these sorts of things. But frankly, if we look at every day's newspaper, that doesn't look like it's going to happen, in a short time. So we have to find design responses to these issues, and they're quite difficult because the climate is a big thing, so it affects us a lot. So I think that there is a stimulus for addressing these issues. Of course, it concerns from my case, heritage and the past environments. But as I said earlier, they are a very rich field of experiences. But at the same time, I think we can look at this. Say things that have been transmitted to us from history to understand and learn. I'd like to make a case. There's a great discussion around the world on the form of the city, future city. It sounds like a big discussion, but it is really a very important one. That more than a quarter of the energy that we consume is for home heating, and probably the other quarter is for transportation to our homes. So, the way in which a city is made is quite relevant in terms of carbon emissions and therefore impacts on climate. There's been a long discussion in the past 20 years on the form of the city that best responds to the future needs. And of course, we're talking about more compact cities. Now, of course, in many countries, including the UK, but America, especially America, cities are very spread out, and very energy consuming. Ancient cities are very compact. In fact, they were designed in an age in which energy was scarce. So we can look at these products as examples of how we can design things that reduce and limit energy consumption, because it is really a case that has been already experienced and experimented. I live in Paris, by the way, and Paris is a compact city. It was designed at the time in which elevators had not been invented yet, because the elevators came in the second half of the 19th century, and Paris is the first half, the modern Paris is the first half of the. So they decided to make a city of 6 floors, because that's the most you can climb. I mean, after that, it becomes impossible. So all of Paris is 6 floors, all of it. You look at it, it's extremely uniform and compact, and all of it it's 6 floors. And 6 floors is, and this density that is made up by this building of 6 floors is higher than Manhattan. You can actually achieve higher population density in a compact city than in a spread out city. So again, let's take the lessons of the past. Let's try to understand how changes can affect our own values. You may have noticed that there was an accident in Paris just recently. Burned, Notre Dame burned completely. Well, that raised an issue which has to do with climate change. When Notre Dame roof burned, the entire structural system of a Gothic cathedral, which, by the way, is one of the most genial inventions of human beings, so something to look at, was weakened because they didn't have the, the vaults anymore and the roof that was ballasting the entire building. And together with some friends, engineers, better than me, we made some calculations, and we noticed that because we had a model of Notre Dame, a mathematical model, we noticed that, in fact, the cathedral has lost so much stability that a wind of over 90 kilometers per hour could have, pushed down the side, the walls. And because there is an increase, dramatic increase of storms in this part of the world because of the Atlantic. And if you look at the statistics, there's been a tremendous increase of storms in the past 10, 15 years. We think that this is a new risk. So we have also to look at how climate change affects things that exist and things that we can design for the future. And again, and I conclude, I think The Past is a great book where we can learn many things. By the way, in the program, you may have seen that I'm also coordinator of a polar lab. This is not a senile drift. This is an activity that I have launched last year when I left UNESCO, because we look at heritage and architecture in extreme environments. I think you just mentioned that, because I think in these environments, many things are simplified. Things have become very simple. You really have to survive. So you can't just discuss too much. You have to find things that are efficient and appropriate for the environment. So we're looking at how we are, how human beings, when they went to these regions, and this year we are looking at Antarctica, and by the way, we will bring this to the Biennale in September. There will be a full week of discussion on Antarctic architecture to the design week, and it's very interesting to see how human beings adapted to this environment, what kind of things they learned, how to, places where you have minus 50 degrees for 6 months a year, and you have to survive. So we're looking at that both in terms of heritage and architecture and design as an example of how we can experiment, how we can test modern design to address future challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. Actually, your comment on the Notre Dame there reminds me of an idea a colleague had, which was, couldn't we use the ocean plastics to reconstruct the Notre Dame roof? Wouldn't that be an interesting perspective, reflection of humanity? But Sara, would you like to go next?
Thanks. Let's see if the slides could come up there. Thank you very much for inviting me here, and thank you for the previous speakers. I'm an architect. I'm a partner at White Arkitekter, which is a Scandinavian practice. We also have an office here in London. And in our work, we strive to work closely in interdisciplinary teams with architects, urbanists, landscape architects, environmental specialists, and socio-anthropologists, all in-house. And this is necessary to be able to design informed and creative answers to the complex challenges we face today. And I would like to share some very few projects we are working on. Kiruna is an industrial town in the subarctic climate where the sun never rises in winter and never sets in summer. The town is literally built upon the world's largest iron ore mine and has a symbiotic relationship to the mine as its primary economic resource. The extraction is digging deeper and is getting closer to the city center. Kiruna must move. Climate change is present in Kiruna with even more snow, heavier spring floods and warmer summers. And Kiruna's existential situation has come to resonate deeply within me. The new town is designed to maximize the social urban qualities as well as give easy access to the natural landscape, which is highly valued by the Kiruna people. The Kiruna process tells us what design can be in a state of crisis, where the future is unknown. The red circle marks the current city hall, which is, or was, a beautiful national heritage building, a loved meeting place for the people of Kiruna. It's being demolished as we speak. The concrete building was too complicated to disassembly, too heavy to move, and impossible to recycle. A huge memorial loss and a vast carbon debt. The process is under extreme time pressure. Kiruna has to create a new city center in just 20 years. I'm working at the moment with the relocation of the cathedral. The new location must have a cultural resonance as well as a resistance to the changing climate. The red circles show the current and the new location. The beautiful wooden cathedral is also a national heritage building. The entire building is built with wood and was inaugurated in 1912. The lightness of the structure and the assembly methods makes the building possible to move. 2025, the church will be re-inaugurated. Reuse is an act of processing cultural identity as well as using our resources wisely. Since Kiruna's location is far from other populated regions, it is wise to use its resources efficiently. The idea of the Kiruna portal, an extra large recycling station, was suggested by us already in the competition and is slowly, I would say, being adopted by the city. The networks of streets is designed to limit the effects of the cold winds and create pleasant conditions to encourage public outdoor life. Preserved buildings and building components will be placed throughout the new city. The city will be denser, but with a closer connection to the natural landscape. The city park will have a year-round activities and meeting places, and the park serve as a snow storage and will handle the melting waters in springtime. And the interplay between city and nature is essential in Kiruna, and I would say for all of us. Another project I would like to briefly share with you is the transformation of the city Örebro in the middle of Sweden. The city is undergoing a huge change from an industrial city to a knowledge-based community with an expanding university. And at the moment, there is a huge industrial site in the center of the city, creating a hole in the urban fabric. It has been the state-owned workshop for repairing all trains in Sweden. And the workshop is now being relocated, and an opportunity to weave the city together appears. On site, there is a number of historical buildings that represent the industrial heritage, as well as they contain huge material resources. We started out with evaluating the buildings due to their possibility to be rethought, transformed and reused. But equally important is to design the new public realm to make the buildings accessible as meeting places in the expanding city. And as architects, we deal with the relation between form, function and performance and must see beyond the finished project and map the entire breadth of future possibilities instead of finding the optimal answer to demands defined in one randomly chosen moment. And ultimately, this is resulting into an architecture that can be loved by generations and adapted to new uses over and over again. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ben, would you like to
I will, thank you.
close the
I'm a branding designer, I work in London. We don't work in the field of sort of efficiency, in terms of making things better in terms of that sense, but we do work in the field of behaviour change, and I think that's where it's quite interesting with the role I have right now. I'm going to stick to a script because 5 minutes isn't very long to talk, so I apologise, but I really want to get across some of the points here. And ultimately, I don't necessarily have a solution here, and also don't want to look like I'm righteous with any viewpoint here, but this is my take on where I see things at the moment. I don't want to paint sort of a picture of a doomsday future that we're all hurtling towards. We're all very aware of the problem, and we only are now just starting to frame the challenge. We know there is no silver bullet to the environmental crisis that we're all facing, and we know we have to change our ways before change comes to us, and that's a far less desirable thing to happen. So this is a little bit of a rallying cry, an attempt to sort of show my perspective on things. So next slide. I believe it's never been a better time to be a designer. So let's remember, if I take you back to my personal viewpoint, why I wanted to be in the creative industry in the first place. I don't know about you guys, but I wanted to be in this wide and wonderful industry because I wanted to create beautiful things, to make things better, and ultimately more useful, and in a small part, be part of imagining a better future. But the reality of what we have created between us in the last 50 or so years is not so wonderful. It's actually wasteful. Somewhere in the last half of a century or more, something went wrong. We've been plagued by short-sightedness and short-term thinking, and nothing sums this up better than one example, which is the Livermore light bulb, which is in the fire station in San Francisco, just outside San Francisco, is a light bulb that's been burning continuously for 119 years. It was installed in 1901, the year Theodore Roosevelt was given the keys to the White House. 19 presidents have come and gone in that time, but the light bulb has remained a functioning constant. But then in 1925, the Phoebus cartel came together in Switzerland and ensured that never again would a light bulb last forever. The age of planned obsolescence was born, changing the history of the global economy by generating repeated sales and maximizing profit. It turned a humanity need, which was light for everybody, into a commodity, from maker into marketeer, and from us as citizens into consumers. So how will the last 50 years be remembered? A consumer economy, and some of these are really interesting. These aren't my made-up things, but you've got the famous ecologist, design writer, Victor Papanek, calling it a Kleenex century. He wrote about that in 1976. Here we are 50 years later, in the same problem. Everything that we create today is built and made let me start again. A consumer economy where virtually nothing is built to last, and everything to do with our environmental crisis stems from our obsession with consumption, with stuff. And according to the Centre for Climate Technology, half of China's emissions are from factories making goods for consumers in the West. We live in an age where we actually think it is now normal to buy things, use them momentarily, and just throw them away. But of course, we now know there is no way. And everything we create has a consequence and an impact. Humans are the only species on the planet who create waste, and we are experts at it. And plastic is the poster child of that, the great enabler of the massive ramp-up in consumption during the 70s and 80s, and the rate of which waste increases annually and exponentially. I think this says everything about how we take, how we make, and how we waste. This is where it went wrong. There's a great quote here by the fairly new CEO of Unilever, Alan Jope, simply saying, I sometimes wonder if we're in the branded litter business or branded trash. But the good news is that we seem to be waking up. Even the new CEO from the fourth biggest polluter on the planet knows that everything needs to change. By the way, we do some work for Unilever, so I need to be careful what I say.
You're saying the right thing.
But I think only from that viewpoint, that radical transparency, can change come about. So I think it's the most optimistic of statements. I recently looked up what the original meaning of consumer is. It's from the 15th century, and it simply means one who squanders or wastes. And yet this is our target, our focus for everything we create and make. So we need to stop treating ourselves as consumers and return to being citizens, because being citizens has a different resonance, one of community, of connectedness to others, and a respect for nature. And with us being citizens, we don't need to talk about sustainability. The word actually needs rebranding. It needs reinventing, because they are beyond it. They are responsible. And with this new sense of responsibility, we need to reframe the way we see consumption. This is the tipping point change, I believe, for our environmental crisis. This is the future that my parents grew up imagining. And this is the future I grew up in the 70s and 80s imagining. Tomorrow's World, Jetsons, Star Trek, all of this kind of thing. But today, our children just dream of a future of climate catastrophe. Our children are striking. They are telling us what we have done wrong. They are pointing at the science, incredulous that we carry on regardless. And indirectly, they have reframed the conversation. They've made it resonate with us. They are simply asking that someone in power does something. And it's very simple. Slightly controversially, because I know Extinction Rebellion are here, but for me, activism and politics is not going to fix our future because it doesn't run the world. Big business does. Business has the power and creativity is the key. So business and brands and the creatives they depend on will need to lead this change. So we have a responsibility as a collection of creatives to create a new vision to reshape their future. Because who simply wants to create more stuff? Who wants to be in the business of branded pollution? And so how will the next 50 years be remembered? By building in a respect for the future with the things we live with today, where beautiful, useful, and durable is the new normal. This is why it couldn't be a better time. But creatives need to show responsibility with vision, with leadership, and with guts. And my very last slide. One project of quite a few now that we're working on was a fully circular economy project with Unilever on a brand called Minim. And what I find so inspiring about this, obviously it's a new way of how we can buy and use materials, but also the ability to work on an everyday product like a deodorant where they own 50% of the global market and everybody has to engage with this, everyone should use this product every day. The opportunity to create behavioural change to a large swathe of population is, I think, remarkable. And interestingly, big brands now, big business has the ability to make change quickly and to touch very many people. So I'm really excited about the way these big businesses are moving. And I think the final few points for me, the role of designers like me is to make this new way desirable, to make it different, to make it cool, and to make it resonate. The key mechanic of change is not fear or guilt, or even to make it look green or eco. It's to make it people want it, to make it desirable. And for me, that's why I think it's never been a better time to be a designer.
Thank you, Ben. So I think we've got time. I'll give sort of one question around, but then after that, we'll probably open up the floor for a couple of questions here as well. And I think one of the, I was trying to think of what are the kind of golden threads that unite such a variety and different group of people. But I think one of the things that I find in the work I do is this topic always comes down to two things. It comes down to the need to collaborate and the need to innovate. And for me, that's about, how are we talking to people? What are the hidden opportunities that exist for us to be able to talk to people in different ways, wherever they may be, in an emerging economy and a developed economy. And so I guess I'm just interested in terms of your unique position and unique perspective on what some of the hidden opportunities are to engage people, in their context, in this issue, in order to create that resonance. Open up to whoever wants to go first.
Well, I don't mind starting. One of the projects we've been involved with an organisation called A Plastic Planet, who we work very closely with their creative partner, is the world's first plastic-free supermarket. And obviously, ironically, supermarkets have been plastic-free for thousands of years. It's only in the last 50 or 60 years have we filled them with, I think, 97% of most supermarkets have some level of plastic in the products that you buy. But what I like about the demand of A Plastic Planet, as an example, is to make the topic every day. We all saw the images of Attenborough's whale, which is remarkable, and it switched everyone's zeitgeist. But we don't have a relationship with the ocean. And so it can affect us quite deeply. But taking that conversation, like the deodorant, for example, taking it into the supermarket allows people to have an everyday connection to it. And it's really about choice. At the moment, you go into a supermarket, you have no choice other to buy plastic. And this is about a plastic-free alternative, and it's making it easy to shop. It's not going to, all the canisters and all the things that you need to collect from, but it's about giving people choice. I think it's taking it into the everyday rather than lots of words or lots of activism. It's actually making the change on the ground.
Yeah. And I guess if that's from a point of view of a developed economy, if you like, I'm wondering, Angela, do you have a sort of point of view in terms of engaging in the emerging markets, in terms of the, where India, China, that part of the world is the point of view in terms of how we engage better?
So for me, as an independent curator, I think arts and visual arts is really important to communicate climate change, which is really dense in the science, but also quite sticky in the politics. And so to have something visual, something that is almost emotive, it makes it much more palatable and easier to engage with. So for me, I quite fortunately am able to straddle institutional and also grassroots groups. And so in terms of kind of like showing solidarity with developing countries like India, like China, and to kind of like forefront those front lines of climate change, I think is really important within the cultural sector. I feel like it's very easy, especially in London, to forget why we're programming a lot of climate change into our public programs, our curatorial kind of like platforms. I fear also that it's very trendy, it's very cool, and I do worry about what happens when the fashionable kind of like tone of it evaporates. It is a very urgent cause. We have an emergency, and I feel, I'm not quite answering a question because I'm not talking about the markets, but much more in the cultural sector. I feel like it's very important to, put emphasis on those who are going to be left behind, because we don't want to leave anyone behind.
Well, communicating climate change and the risks associated is not easy, and in fact, I think we're still lacking some important steps. I would describe it more like as a landscape. In some points, in some parts, we've been successful. For instance, people that deal with the natural environment have been able to communicate quite effectively. Now people know about the whales, and people have been sensitized on this. A little less, I would say, in the field I work on, which is cultural heritage, but still, I think we have some resonance of that. What's missing a lot is at the consumer level. That's why I think it's important what you're saying. It's because people don't, somehow are more interested in the economic side than in the impact side. So we have to make a big effort there, and perhaps using the icons that come from these other examples that I mentioned could be very useful. Unfortunately, today in the world, we have very big forces that are countering these arguments. This is a big issue. We have to be frank. I mean, politics is today's politics, especially Trump and the rest, is totally against, and we don't know how this thing is going to evolve. We don't know how the other big powers, China, Russia, Europe, etc., will, and even the emerging markets in Africa will actually address this issue. Will they really become conscious and partners of this, say, climate change communication or not? I am not sure, because we have seen things moving on one side and then going quickly back on the other side. So I think there is a very big moral issue, but also a very technical issue of implanting a strong communication in the consumer world.
For me, working in the field of architecture, which is a very place-based design field, I think the key is to really involve the people on site in the design decisions, because they are actually the true experts on their conditions and their site, and they often experience climate change before scientists do it. The people of Kiruna notice the heavier snowfalls during winter before any data comes up on the news. So, and also really to work with and for the people on site is the key for, I think, successful design in terms of architecture and urban design. Yeah. So that is really, it's not easy. You need to, for us architects, we need to involve other specialists on the team to be able to get that information from the people, because we are maybe not the best profession to be on site and talk to people. So that's why we, for example, work together with social anthropologists on our team.
Yeah. It's often so much a challenge is how to actually create that communication link in order to speak to such a large number of people at once. But got a few minutes left and just want to open up to the floor in terms of whether there's any specific questions for any individual or maybe as a group. I think there's a mic roving somewhere. There's one here.
Hello, hi. I have a question to Sara, actually, as an architect. And I'm wondering, your work in Kiruna is very impressive. And I'm wondering, do you think there is enough expertise in the profession and solidarity to do research and pick up the right materials to involve built environments into this action? Your view. Thank you.
I think since it's kind of a process we're in, and everyone is kind of wanting to make a good solution for the Kiruna, but I think we really need more research, we really need more experts, we really need to collaborate with even more people, because we don't have the answers. We just have all the questions at the moment, so we are kind of searching for the answers on how the Kiruna will be in the future. So for me, it's an open and an open source thing. So I think it would be dangerous if we came and said that we have all the expertise, we have all the answers. It's a kind of design process we are in, involving as many as possible.
One. Okay.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, plastic straws, for example, are only 0.03% of the 8 million metric tons of ocean plastic waste, yet plastic straws are the things that people want to ban. But for many disabled people, that's not the case. We have to use plastic straws. So what I really wanted to find out is how can we include disabled people in the sustainability conversation, because disabled people, we are the world's largest minority, and it's not disabled people versus non-disabled people. It's disabled people and they're not yet disabled, because everybody here is going to be old enough that they're going to end up disabled. So how can we actually engage in disability and sustainability? Because often we don't have a choice in the matter. We don't have any kind of, we're not even brought into the conversation. So I just wanted to find out everybody's thoughts to see how we can include disability in the sustainability and in the design process, really.
Anyone want to?
It's a big topic. Yeah. That needs thinking about. I have no answer for that at all, but thank you for raising that. And just to clarify my point on plastics, I mean, don't forget, plastics is the most remarkable invention. It's probably the best invention of the 20th century. It's just being used for the wrong things. And so we're very much the focus is on single-use plastic. But again, I'd like to think about your question, and I haven't got an answer at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I mean, just from my point of view and the work we're doing, I think there's a challenge at the moment, which is that we have this sort of rush to sort of oversimplify everything in terms of sort of buckets of, plastic is bad, and therefore we need to have a war on plastic, right through to actually that does have a role potentially in sort of eliminating some of the kind of higher carbon impacts of maybe a glass material. And so I think we need to challenge the debate continuously and ensure that we're bringing as much evidence into the conversation as possible. And we had a conversation before the panel about, how do you get the kind of the true analysis, the true insight of, what the environmental cost of a particular material is. Straws are definitely not the problem. As one example, there are plenty of other things which are the problem. But we need to sort of evolve the debate to be something much more sophisticated than it currently is.
And I think one way of trying to evolve those debates is questioning who are speaking on our panels. Is it a representative panel? Is everyone being amplified in the same way as well? So it's not just about looking at the evidence on plastics and who's using what and who's the most wasteful. It's saying that, you know, in the rooms that where decisions or policies are being made, do we have a variety of people that speak and make decisions?
I have a question on that, just because we're going to be coming on next to political resonance. And I want to ask you, Stephen, in the work that you've shown us that you're doing, how much of it is being done because of policy, and how much of it is being done in spite of policy?
That's an interesting question. So I would say that from what I've observed, it has been largely policy driven up until about sort of 6-12 months ago. I think from what I've witnessed, you know, I think the sort of the Blue Planet effect in the UK and a very similar effect in the US, which is not quite so much to do with the Blue Planet on the plastics topic as an example, you know, has really captured the imaginations of people that are wanting to do the right thing and to demand more sustainable products. I think in the US, for example, there's a point of view of, you know, we need to, as a people, to be shown to be doing more because perhaps the policy environment isn't so favourable to sustainability issues at the moment. So, you know, I think there's definitely a consumer-led movement now, which I think is really challenging brands and challenging our clients to sort of raise their game. But I think there's sort of I think the other element to that is the collectives that were happening now. You see things like the UK Plastics Pact as sort of a voluntary collective of businesses and NGOs that are coming together sort of in a new space, very closely coupled to policy making, and policy making is sort of mirroring most of the things they're doing. But there's these sort of new collectives, new collaborations coming forward now, which I think is a really interesting sign for the future.
I think it's interesting, just Ben, in relation to your point about Extinction Rebellion, is that, you know, we get to the result that actually some of the things are not coming from the top down from policy. We look at last week, you know, this wonderful report on completely revitalizing the fast fashion industry that's been completely rejected. Mm-hmm. And yet, you know, what you're saying is that it's from a consumer demand that we're actually starting to shift policy, and consumer demand does come from some of the action that shut down the streets in London from Extinction Rebellion. So I think we have to include this vital work as part of the conversation, as well as what you outlined. Yeah,
the work I love with Extinction Rebellion, the bit I really admire is the tell the truth. And I think, you know, look at the quote by Ellen Jope there. I mean, we talk about radical transparency. Well, actually, there's some proof points here. So telling the truth is a key point, and it comes from ground up, because now once you know, you can't unknow. And so once you start using plastics and you see it, I mean, we've been sleepwalking into this for 3 or 4 decades, and suddenly now our eyes are open, and you can't undo that. So I think it's a remarkable time.
I went to the Arctic last year, on a cruise, on a scientific cruise, and we were taking, you know, measures of plastic, microplastics in the Kara Sea, you know, just around the Novaya Zemlya in Russia. Can you believe that it was plenty of microplastic in the Arctic? And also we have a major problem. The numbers are very bad. We are less than 10% is recycled, the plastic, and then other 90% goes into the oceans, creating this gigantic pollution. This is really one of the most serious issues globally, because soon we will all be poisoned by this. I think it's something to launch as a big alarm.
Yeah, I quite agree, and I witnessed that myself in the North Atlantic Gyre a few weeks ago. And what was interesting, though, is on that vessel we had scientists from the Five Gyres Institute, and they were saying they're just about to publish research which says that if you can reduce by 20% per year the waste material going into the major 7 rivers in Asia over a 7-year period, then in year 7 the microplastic concentration in the ocean will reduce to pre-1990s levels. So actually, there's quite a kind of hopeful statement in that it's not that impossible. So that's certainly where we're focusing our energies right now.
One last point is, I think it's interesting, the English Oxford Dictionary's word of the year last year was toxic. So when we talk about a groundswell of change, everybody is feeling it. And that's why, you know, the time is now. Tell the truth. All of these things are right, but we need to see now great creativity like we've never seen before. And that sounds like
What a great invitation.
it is, yeah, to your point there, yeah.
So on that note, I think we're out of time, and but I thank all of my colleagues today for joining us on the panel, and thank you all for the questions and engagement.